Okay, my dear friends, so we are 3 minutes away from starting. So we can start turning on our cameras and Luis Fernando and Guillermo are gonna give us the clue when the video, the advertising video that introduces every one of you and the participations is gonna be displayed first, and afterwards I will do the welcoming and the introduction of the first three presenters, poem, and then the introduction to the other three presenters. Entonces, en la parte técnica estamos a 2 minutitos, estamos pendientes de cuando nos den la señal para iniciar. Entonces ya creo que están todos iniciando sus cámaras. Y las apagamos una vez hagamos como la bienvenida y nos quedamos simplemente con quien está presentando. Listo, creo que ya estamos todos. Ok. Aprovecho este minutito para presentarles a los otros miembros de la clase de Pedagogía y Cultura. I take this time to introduce you to the other students from Pedagogy and Culture class. So we have Paola and Sonia here. We have Maribel and Lorena as well. They are part of the course. So yeah. Okay, welcome everyone. We are starting this second space that we have called Critical Dialogues of Hope. So we are really excited of coming together as friends and colleagues around the world and here in Colombia. So we welcome you all to this space that whose only intention is to develop understandings about what we have experienced during this year in the different roles that we have played as mothers, as fathers, as brothers, sisters, siblings, wives, etc., plus all the academic work we do and administrative positions that we occupy in different institutions around the world. So welcome to this space. My name is Nancy Carvajal, and I'm going to start this space by acknowledging the lands that have embraced us, the lands we are coming from, and the lands of the indigenous peoples that continue struggling for in defense of life, and the territories and the right to have access to education and many different multiple rights. Today, we're going to bring a quote from one indigenous sister who says that when we talk about land, land is part of who we are. It's a mixture of our blood, our past, our current, and our future. We carry our ancestors in us, and they are around us, as you all do. So then, yeah, so this is a little reminder that we are connected, that we need to acknowledge all those communities in the land, and that the land is part of who we are as individuals in every part of the process of growth that we are experiencing. We would also like to acknowledge La Minga is a group of indigenous communities in the southwest of Colombia who in previous days started to walk the territory so that they could get to the capital, Bogota, and they could talk to the president in order to demand for different rights that have been denied to them for centuries. Unfortunately, the president of the country was not willing to talk to them. So then our brothers and sisters from NASA and other 10 indigenous communities came back to the territory 2 days ago without having been able to talk to the president. So this is our acknowledgement of their work and how they are showing us through example what it means to mobilize in peace, what it means to come together as a community, and what it means to build a political agenda that defends life in the territories. We also welcome you with this Mayan principle in Lakek, which means you are my other self. If I hurt you, I hurt myself. If I love you and respect you, I love and respect myself. So when you accepted the invitation to participate in the dialogue, and everyone who's joining us today in the dialogue today, we have been promoting these 3 values of love, care, and empathy as part of the conversation. So we want us to remind ourselves that we are reflected in our brothers and sisters around the world, no matter if we affiliate to the same ethnic group or to the same place of origin, or if we have differences in the ways we feel or think in terms of politics, economics, and our loving expressions. And then there's this picture that you see in the background is an art piece by Doris Salcedo, which is a Colombian sculptor who made an exhibit in which she was threading rose petals. So then, of course, the rose petals went through a specific treatment, but she was weaving this kind of cloth as a way to approach the violated bodies in the territory and as a way to heal us as a society, as a society. So then Doris Salcedo will be accompanying us in the dialogue during this couple of days. So why are we getting here? What is the importance? As a course, the Pedagogy and Culture course, we've been analyzing and reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. We've been reading Teaching to Transgress from Bell Hooks, amongst other literature from critical feminist scholars, Chicana Latina feminists as well. And we've been understanding that there's different mechanisms of oppression that are in play. So we have fear, we have division of the communities as a mechanism of oppression, and also this devaluing of the self. So most of the times we have internalized these discourses that tell us that what we do and who we are and what we can contribute to the discussion is not a valuable, contribution. So then in this case, we believe that our lived experiences, and I'm going to quote in this moment Norma Cantú, a Chicana Latina feminist, who says that our reflected upon experiences are valid forms of scholarship and knowledge. So when we are immersed in academic spaces where individualism and competition are being promoted, listening that our lived experiences are important and are a source of knowledge and a scholarship, so it's very valid to us. So yeah, that's what we're gonna be doing during this afternoon, like sharing our lived experiences, everything that we have understood, and this as a way, as an example, I think, of a pedagogy of praxis, of us coming together as communities to think, to reflect, to be hopeful, to support one another. So in this afternoon, we're gonna have the topic that I think that connects all of our presentations is connecting to our roots. So we're gonna be listening first to Jenny and Christian, so I met them in their graduate, education as their master teacher, and we are still engaging in these spaces of dialogue in the pedagogy and culture class. And we're going to be listening also to Jasmine, who's going to remind us about this idea of weaving threads with the communities. And I met Jasmine through, an exercise of academic writing, and then we engaged in dialogue. And I'm really glad that we could really connect, because she's also a boyacense, so we are from the same department, from PAES, and then we are connected in our ways in which we see and we think about academia and everything that we do with the communities. So I welcome the three of you, and welcome everyone to this space of dialogue. So we are here together in Zoom with the pedagogy and culture class. So I'm gonna name all the students that are making part of this space. So we have Jenny, we have Sonia, Daniel, Christian, Maribel, Lorena, Jamie, and Paola. So we are part of this course, and we hope to engage in dialogue with all of you. So Christian, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you so much, dear teacher. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I really hope we enjoy as much as possible this space that allows reflection and allows us to think upon the issues that we are currently living. Thank you so much. Well, now I would like to start my presentation, all right? So in this case, we are going to talk about, all right, a world dialogue. So a world dialogue. This world dialogue is an exploration to the concepts of citizen and citizenship in times of pandemic. So as I told you, my name is Cristian Moises Coy Torres, and I come from Moniquirá, Colombia. Well, so amid the COVID-19 crisis, we have experienced some changes in the way that we see the world and the way we interact with the others. In order to protect ourselves, we have moved many face-to-face interactions to online settings, and we have started to perform a kind of digital citizenship, sometimes following Medicaid. So this is a quote from Xie and Xie in 1994. So, well, now, what I would like to talk to you about the digital citizenship is that we are going to move all the rules that we had in order to express our citizenship, but to virtual settings. So that's what mainly they are expressing, all right? We are expressing in this very moment that we are experiencing the virtual settings and all of that. So this is very pertinent for us to reflect upon. So this exploration started in that. So how do I turn everything to virtual settings? How do we turn everything into the context of virtuality, all right? So in this case, how do we arrive to a concept of citizenship by reflecting inside ourselves? So we had into account three things, all right? So the first one was my lived experiences. The number two was my opinions, and finally, the way I feel. So by studying or by going with the first one, I would like to tell you that, well, I did this with the help of many of my friends around the world. So I'm happy to tell you that I contacted them and that I could put them to write like a short reflection about what they thought about citizenship. Like, what is your concept, or what would you think? What is your opinion in regards to the concept of citizenship? So in this case, the first that I got from was from Ghana. So it is a country which is located in Africa. So in this case, he says that before these pandemic times, he used to exercise his citizenship, like going to lectures, church, vote, and social gatherings without considering precautions such as the social distancing, the use of face masks, and hand sanitizers. But amidst the pandemic, there are actions that are being done remotely. if possible, or when physically considering the precautions above. All right, so he was stating in this case that he felt like, like a hard change in the way that they interacted among them, because he had to be like away, away from the ones you love, all right? But yeah, in this case, he felt that. And his opinion here was that, well, citizenship can be also understood as a set of rules that we can perform in order to behave or in order to coexist the ones with the others. If he had to apply those rules that we are applying now, he would continue applying them because he would like to strengthen his bond to the others. All right, so this was very interesting from him. And now we have another concept that was given from one of my friends also in Colombia. So she said that for her, citizenship is the link between society and people. So yeah, understanding society by everything that surrounds us, that's the link that we're looking for. Now, in regards to go to the third one, how I feel about that. So now it comes connecting to the others, all right? So in this case, we find 4 categories. So the first one is the experiences that I know from other people. Number 2, what I recall from those experiences I know. Number 3, how I feel about that. And number 4, putting myself to action. And in this case, how I care about the others. So in this case, what I got from their reflection, all right, in this case, we are going to quote Brazilian case and Colombian case, all right? So the first one from Colombia says that the role that every person has or performs in the way of listening to the opinions of the other ones is important on the means of how to express the ideas of oneself. Like, I express my ideas and my opinions, and then the other one expresses his or her own, all right? And that we can, in this case, coexist together. Now I'm going to move to the Brazilian one, the one on the left. So it says, the pandemic woke up even more in myself, solidarity and a sensitivity spirit for the needs that my other one has. I understood that if I had troubles, there are many people who have troubles even harder than mine. So in this case, she wanted to state her concept of citizenship in the means of having these spaces to help the others, to understanding the interaction among others in the sense of, in this case, understanding. All right? Wait a little, I forgot to tell you the other one. Well, so now, the other concept was that I execute my citizenship by participating and taking care of other citizenship of other citizens, sorry, and the environment. So in this case, he included the aspect of the environment, and this is very interesting because we are arriving to reflect upon these times of pandemic to issues that we may not have talked about. And finally, we have the other one from Brazil who says that it is also about belonging to smaller communities where one citizen recognizes the other, where shared culture is the ground for coexisting. It's interacting with other communities from different backgrounds and having that process of intercultural communication, learning and teaching what makes us citizens, individuals who belong to a geographical space in a historical period of time. So this concept is more broadened than the other ones. This one covers like everything that we have talked about so far, and this one was from one of my friends in Brazil. So he tells us that everything is immersed into citizenship, and this is so wonderful because you will never imagine how far you will start executing your citizenship. Sorry about that. All right. Now we have another connection that is to the world. So now we find some other categories. So how I connect to my context, what my footprint in regards to nature is, how can I make or how I can make a nurturing exchange transaction, with my surroundings. And the other one is like if I feel hopeful about that, yeah? So in this case, they portrayed many things, and I'm going to share with you like some of them. So I execute my citizenship when I participate in my neighborhood in all communal activities, participate in the school in social events such as voting for the elections or doing community work. So in this case, it is important to highlight the importance that for my friend in Colombia has the community work and the participation of on the communal activities, all right? The other one from Colombia, which is down the one that I have read, is like, for me, citizenship is a term that recognizes us as a person with rights and duties, as well as being a native person of a town, city, or country, and acts in the politics of that place. After the arrival of this pandemic, allow for all the citizens to do well is the mandatory use of masks. This current situation has changed our lives too much, but I know that if we all come together from a distance, we can get out of this. So even though this person is expressing somehow that he or she has been like finding some struggle while dealing with the uses of the mask and the social distancing because of the pandemics, she is also stating that she feels hopeful. So in the end of all, we are going to be able to handle the situation. Now, another interesting fact here was in Brazil. Again, another friend of mine answered, the lack of a hug, physical contact, didn't impede or didn't allow didn't allow the people to stay like, to remain quiet and not to do an action, all right? So she says that people re reshaped the situation so that we have now interaction into virtual settings. Another friend from Colombia says that the pandemic teaches us that we have to be more solidary and to be more socially responsible, to think in myself for the other ones, and to think of the other ones for myself. Now, another concept that is very interesting came from Nepal, all right? There where Mount Everest is. So now we are going to get people have become more aware of what's going on around their surroundings since they have had the opportunity to be introspective about the contemporary situation, especially in their own land. So this opinion in regards to citizenship connects the man with the land. And this helps us to get to our next stage, that a citizen does not exist alone, but with many others, sharing the territory, culture, etc. And finally, something that I really felt interest about and that I wanted to make them reflect upon was how they connect that with the South. So in this case, I took Boaventura de Sousa Santos, who is a writer from Portugal, about the Southern epistemologies or epistemologies of the South. And I also took into account the principles of the good living according to Guanacuni Mamani, which is who is a Peruvian member of an indigenous community, and is very important in that country. So he tells us that we have to connect everything, not only to the land and to myself and to the others, but with our ancestors. So what's the value of our ancestors in the citizenship? Well, so we have somehow, all right, explorations about those concepts. So the first one came from Spain, which was that the pandemics has helped me reflect upon my place in the world, the place of my past generations, and what will come in the future. Now, from Nepal, I got that people have been inquisitive about how their ancestors mitigated similar situations like a pandemic in the past, which has become a way of connecting to their ancestors and family tradition. It is also a way to establish intergenerational dialogues, with our older ones, right? So I may ask my grandma how she did, like, in order to recover from a flu or kind of that, right? So those saberes, all right, that we have from our awichas, as Wanakuni Mamani calls our grandmas, so are very interesting, all right? Now, another concept that I got from my friends was that everything goes from understanding and respecting the presence of different ethnic communities and microcultures that inhabit the same space, all right? So in this one, we are getting the value or giving the value to all of the communities that we have. They are very rich in knowledge. They are very rich in everything, all right? So in this case, basically, what he's stating at this point is that if we inhabit a place with other people, we are being rich in sources of knowledge, in sources of interaction, in sources of humanity. And finally, we have another one from Brazil who says that he will be good for his, for his alike, all right? He will love them the way that he or she feels loved and praised and cared by God, all right? So if we get back to the concept of God, we will find that our indigenous people had the sun, the moon, and all of the things that surround us as this are the sources to believe in, all right? So in this case, I think that God is more than, more than more than a concept. He is everything that surrounds us. So in this case, we are going to start connecting to the South, reflecting upon citizenship, reflecting about the pandemics. And I will leave you with a question. So after all this, what's your concept of citizenship? Thank you so much. Well, so
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for leaving us with all those messages. And yeah, we're gonna welcome Jenny to join the dialogue. And we are, yeah, this key question will keep, ringing in our minds throughout the conversation, and we will come back to that question by the end. So Jenny, welcome.
Okay, sorry. Good afternoon to everybody. Wait a little bit. I'm having some problems with my computer. Sorry, let's wait like 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. Take your time. Yeah, you ready? Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, let's go ahead. Okay.
Sorry. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jenny Bautista. I am really happy to be here, sharing time with you and sharing our experiences from our role as teachers, and also our personal experiences that are now really important and that make a meaningful process to tell the others what is it what we are doing during these hard times. So I decided to talk today about the topic of family, coming back to family. What does it mean for me coming back to family? We have like an important or a very popular saying here in Colombia that we say family is family, no? And we always come back to family, and especially in hard times. So I think that this pandemic has bring us the opportunity to come back to family and see how family can support the processes with our students. So I consider that family is the basis of society. and that we can address different issues and different things from what family means for our students and for the community. And I am a really familiar person. If somebody asks me about my cultural identity, I have to say that family is really important to me. If somebody asks me also about what do you belong to, I have to say that I belong to my family, to my land. I grew up in a rural area in a farm with my parents and my brothers. And for me, they mean everything for me. So I bring some part of what I am, of my cultural identity, to what I do in my context. I am a truly believer of the rural education, and for that reason I am working in a rural context. So let's move here to the next slide. I found it pertinent to bring this quotation that I found, and it says, "A truly good education is rooted in good family upbringing and parental love and guidance." Just in the session in the morning, we talk about love, no? Like love permeates like the different fields, and also education. And we have to strengthen also these relations of family and in our students' processes. So for me, if there is no family, there is not a good learning process. So we need to pay attention to that, and to bring family, to make them to participate in our students' learning processes. I see important to tell you something about my context. And here you can see a picture of my students. They are 20 students. I am in charge of 6th graders. I worked in Gambita, Santander. This is a small town here in Colombia. The school is located in the urban area, but the majority of the students come from the rural areas. What can I say about my students? They are really strong, and they really like playing soccer. They have, when they are in the school, they have to work, some of them many hours to get to the school, 2-3 hours, or arriving by horse, or just by motorbikes, yeah, but they just find a way to go to the school. And when they finish the school, the majority of them, they have to arrive to the farms and help their parents with the different chores and growing the land, growing the plants, taking care of the animals. So more or less, this is the context where I work. I have here the challenges during pandemic in relation to the families, no? And it is how to make, as the picture show us, making the impossible possible, yeah? And one of the challenges has been how to engage parents into active participation in the students' learning processes. That is really important. Sometimes when we are in the face-to-face interaction in schools, sometimes we forget about family, and understanding family in this context as the people who live with our students now. As you know, we have families with the parents, mother and father, or living with the older sister or brothers, or with the uncles, some grandparents and aunts, or just with the neighbor. This is what we have here in our families. So it is how to come back to family and engage them, make them to participate in those processes, and take an active part, an action part. And another challenge has been communication. Here in my context, such a hard part, the communication, no access to internet. The majority of the students have problems with that. They are in the rural areas, no connection. So I have to work on that, and I have found different strategies by WhatsApp, by messages, the phone calls, or just for using messages in the learning guides. So it has been such a difficult part, the communication with families and parents. Another challenge has been, okay, what pedagogic strategies to use? Yeah, we have had to readjust just to make some changes in the way we teach the pedagogic strategies we usually use in the classroom. Yeah, and now, okay, what strategies to use with our parents? How to make them to participate in the same instructions in the learning guides? Okay, how to make the teachers the students establish like a dialogue with parents and construct knowledge together. So in that way, we adjust different activities. Also the time, as many of you know, people in the countryside is very busy all the time. They wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning and they go to sleep also very early because the other day is waiting for a long journey. So time has been really important. We have had to be available like all the time, yes, because we talk with the parents. No, teacher, please, it is better on Saturday, it is better on in the afternoon. So it had also been a challenge, you know, because we as teachers have our journey. Okay, it is just 7 or 8 hours here in Colombia that you have to work, but then we had to make it longer in order to attend our students. Another part that it has been a challenge also is the illiteracy of the families. Yeah, we have parents or just people that live with our students that don't know even to write and read. So it has been, how can they help their children if it is really difficult with this problem? So it makes us think, what can we do later to help the parents also to learn to write, to learn to read? In that way, they can be more engaged in these processes. Another one is the engagement and responsibility. Yeah, it is like, okay, make them responsible too for the process. It is like just not only the face-to-face process, that it is the teacher and the students, and I don't know what do you do in the school? I don't know why my child is learning. So it is also important to make them responsible of these processes. It is a responsibility of the whole community. So let's move on. And I have here different strategies that I have used with the community in the place where I worked. And I have a WhatsApp group where I share dozen messages with the parents and the students. I have only six students in the group of WhatsApp, the ones that live here in the urban area. And I try always to motivate parents and students with messages, reminding them how important it is to support the process of their children, to accompany them, and to keep on the process, because in many parts of the years they try to give up. Yeah, say, no, teacher, I can't. I am very busy. The children don't want to do anything. I'm not going to support them anymore. And I had to keep motivating in the group of WhatsApp. I give explanations, clarify doubts, and I am in contact with them daily. Another part is through the learning guides. What I try to do is engage parents with the different activities in the way that they construct knowledge together. I bring just an example. I always at the end or at the beginning of the guide put a part of reflection and put a part of family time. Yeah, let's see here. The example is answer the following questions in Spanish. I had to use Spanish and English in order to keep them engaged. And you can do it with your parents. Yeah. Why are the animals important, for example? Yeah. What will happen if the bees get extinguished? Yeah. It is just for them to establish a dialogue with the students and parents of the person who they live, and construct knowledge. That for me, it is very important. And we can learn a lot of things of these dialogues, of the different questions that they reflect about, or ask your parent or your parents what they think. What do they think about this? And we just get a lot of information about their families and their way of thinking. Another part, a strategy that I used was the recording of podcast. as I wasn't in the place where I worked. I am from Guadalupe. I was in Guadalupe. Sometimes I found difficult the communication. So I decided to record some podcasts and put it in the radio station of the town in Gambita. So the principal was the one in charge of the radio station. And I sent some messages to the students. I said, the parents, okay, pay attention at 11 o'clock that I'm going to talk in the radio station. And they pay attention. I give sometimes explanations or clarify some things to the radio station. It was such a useful strategy. And I have here just some significant experiences with the parents. I'm not going to say that it has been an easy job. It has been difficult to keep them active, participating in the process, but we are in the way, because it is like before the pandemic, it was like no families are all in the school. And then the pandemic and say, okay, families, you have to be part of the process. No, it has been like kind of a step by step. So I have here some activities of sharing time. They have to do some picnic, family, just for them to keep united, yeah? So another activities like, for example, preparing food in family, and they send the pictures by WhatsApp. And they were really excited. So sometimes the parents or the students call me, okay, teacher, how does the food look? Or it was delicious. I shared time with my mother helped me. So it was such a nice experience. Here also they had to send me pictures celebrating the family day, or you can say here just some activities that they had to do together and send the picture. Here also in the picnic, the celebration of the family day, and also in the Escuela de Padres. So also I have here just some questions that I want to share with you. I know that there are many questions that come to our mind related to the role of family in this pandemic, and that it is not only in this pandemic. We have to continue working on that. And I say to the principal of my school, I said, principal, we have to do something with families. Yeah, it is not just in the pandemic. We have had a lot of really beautiful experiences with them, and we can continue working when we come back to the schools. So I want to share these questions with you, and it is how to maintain this role of teacher as constructor of community and familiar union. So it is how to keep on going on these processes. And another question that is, what does this pandemic reveal about parents' roles in education? Yeah, it is. We cannot forget what is the role of parents, and sometimes we have to remind them, hey, you are the mother of this child, of the father of this child, or whatever, and you have to be present. No, it's like the word to be present in this process. And I think that if the family is present, we can do many things, but it is our role as teachers to keep on going on this kind of activities, to readjust our strategies, not only in the pandemic, but in the face-to-face interaction, to make family counts. And it really counts, because if you see that and go beyond the student and know a little bit him or her and their families, you see that we have to work a lot. So I think that it was all that I wanted to share with you. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. Appreciate your comments on families and how we are starting to rethink, the roles of parents, associated to education. So we're gonna bring Jasmine into the dialogue.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate this opportunity of sharing this space with other boyacenses like me and people from other places in and out of the country. I would like to start by sharing a personal story that unveils the reasons why I am here today. 2018 is fresh in my mind. I had recently came back from the US with my family, my daughter, my husband, and his teenage son, and a diploma in teaching English. Settling down in Bogota was not that easy after having experienced a quiet, peaceful city and a university with huge green areas, hundreds of squirrels, and even a river crossing the campus. But I was happy. I had come back to my roots, to my family, and most importantly, I had come back to my beloved Colombia. Apart from the improvement in my abilities to teach English, I noticed a profound desire to get out of the walls of my classroom and the teacher's lounge, while an inner voice reminded me of the Fulbright mantra, come back to your country and make a difference. One day, I heard about a knitting group that got together in the surroundings of my neighborhood. And since I have loved crocheting all my life, I saw this as an opportunity to get out of my work and family's routine. I did not imagine this event was the beginning of a research project about citizenship competences. This place was the scenario of an after-school program that was held at the same time we met to knit. A community leader provided support to a few children in homework assignments in different school subjects like English, language, and mathematics. It came to my attention the way children were treated, children being yelled at and lectured, sent to negative timeout, asked to be sit and silent for long periods of time. A contradictory discourse was evidenced between actions of the adult in charge and what she intended to teach to the children about citizenship competences. Lectures about children not being respectful and how important it was to be respectful were given to the students who listened passively and obediently. Children were asked to make posters about the definition of a given value, for example, respect, responsibility, honesty, empathy. And they were asked to recite the information to mothers in the knitting group who were pleased that children were learning values. I started a program that could help these kids learn English, but most importantly, help them build empathy and assertiveness when interacting with each other. The program took place for 2 weeks, but was abruptly canceled due to the misbehavior of the children. That was not my decision, but I felt really bad. I knew the children were not to blame for their misbehavior. I knew the adults in their life might not have given them opportunities to be empathic or assertive. I knew empathy and assertiveness need to be modeled in the first place by adults who surround the child before expecting them to behave properly. Here is where my role as a mother and my love for crocheting helped me to bond with the other mothers in the knitting group, and little by little, unintentionally, our conversations moved from knitting techniques, materials, patterns to mother's talk. At the same time, the teacher and me could not help sharing things I got to know from my experience teaching restorative practices in the undergrad program at UNICA, the place where I work at. These practices help build and restore relationships, and at the same time are very useful to nurture empathy and assertiveness. Time went by. Circles were carried out every week. Our crocheting became the best excuse to talk, to listen, to be listened to, to learn together, and most importantly, it became a place, a time to breathe and embrace our concerns and difficulties raising our children. Unknowingly, as mothers in the knitting group, we had started living in our own flesh what being empathic and assertive meant. The knitting group was closed when the pandemics came, but the bonds created before COVID-19 still remain strong, and we keep in touch with a few of the mothers and have invited others to join our conversations in virtual circles. Research, as you can see in this story, has transcended my professional duties and has come to be an instrument to knit community and give another type of meaning to my life and keep hope alive for me and for others during these troublesome times. Now, I would like to share with you some lessons learned from the systematization of experience I carried out with these mothers. So these are some of the lessons I learned. Helping mothers build citizenship competencies such as assertiveness and empathy with their children is possible through the integration of some elements of restorative practices. For example, affective questions, affective statements and circles, and some elements of positive discipline like asking statements, consequences, long-term parenting goals, stages of cognitive development, among others. These combine into, dynamics for workshops with the mothers. A combined methodology that includes workshops developed under 4 principles. Those are learning by doing, meaningful learning, and reflecting, and community circles to discuss participants' perspectives and experiences can set the ground to address one of our greatest challenges in Colombia, building empathy and assertiveness first at a personal level, but most importantly, community-wide. The circle dynamic used during the meetings of the knitting group was the cornerstone of community building. Mothers created bonds with each other by sharing not only a space and activities, but most importantly, by sharing their concerns and struggles at home. When we have these talks, we feel relieved, said Anna, one of the mothers. This experience fostered the willingness on the part of mothers to give advice or just listen to others. Unknowingly, by giving advice and listening, they had started to change, to transform their experience, because transformation is rooted in and sustained through relationship. If parents' abilities to teach empathy and assertiveness are to be strengthened, then the community is one of the places for them to start nurturing such abilities in themselves. As a teacher researcher, I am interested in establishing a direct link between the knowledge I have acquired through my academic experience and the needs of a community I belong to. This systematization of experience served to advance my own understanding of citizenship competencies, at least 2 of them, and ways to teach them, and has strengthened my desire to continue working and reaching out to the community. In this process, I have come to the realization that building community must precede any attempt to share expertise with its members. The workshops and community circles are a valuable means to promote learning opportunities among the community, who usually desires that its children grow up being good citizens. Citizenship competencies must concern not only teachers or parents, but above all, the whole community. So finally, I would like to share some factors that might have promoted transformation when I carried out this systematization of experience. So number 1, the circle dynamic used encouraged the mothers to share difficulties lived at home. 2, mothers' desire for the children to develop citizenship competencies for life. the participation of a teacher researcher whose role was facilitating rather than lecturing. The learning process led by the researcher during this systematization of experience. And the community action committee of that neighborhood, who offers constant learning opportunity to the community. Thanks to one of those programs, the study I carried out was possible. So after all this talking on my part, I just want to finish with a question that remains there. And it's a question I would like to ask all of you. What learning opportunities with the community or communities I belong to do I visualize from my teaching or personal experience? I'm just gonna repeat it. What learning opportunities with the community or communities I belong to do I visualize from my teaching or personal experience? Thank you very much for listening.
Wonderful, Jasmine. Thank you so much for leaving us with those questions. Because yeah, in this first session of the afternoon, we've been invited to think beyond, our roles of teachers of a specific discipline, right? So most of us are engaged into the EFL, English as a foreign language teaching programs, and mostly our instructions most of the times focus on teaching the linguistic part, right? How to pronounce, how to write properly, how to conjugate the verbs and different elements, but a little space or not many times we have the opportunity to expand the vision of what teaching implies. And then Christian and Jasmine have brought two important elements or the discussion about citizenship. So how do we position as citizens and how do we bring the conversation in different contexts? One of them being students or friends in different parts of the world. And then the other one being women, that are mothers and whose identity or whose citizenship rights are to some extent being vulnerated or not respected because of the ways in which their own labor is being perceived. Like women's labor is not very valuable or very appreciated by many of us in different contexts. So we consider that being a housewife is not that of a big deal, and we do not appreciate all the caring that comes behind that. So both of you and then Jenny comes into conversation with this idea of family again, right? So what's the importance of family and how do we engage and make parents engage in their children's education? But also again is how to think about what are the different roles that different members of the family play in different moments. And for us, it is a space in family. Most of the families, as Jenny was mentioning, are have different structures. So we have single mothers family, single parents family. We have families that are composed by the child and the grandfather or the grandmother. And in that sense, so we have to be aware of the different configurations and the different challenges that represents. And then we end up with this, again, with this question, what are those opportunities for engaging with communities? What is our work with communities? What does it look like? And as educators, what is that social responsibility we have? Paulo Freire also taught us about this community engagement as part of an educator's role. So I've been wondering since when teacher educator programs have been removed from that communal sense, right? Or did teacher education programs ever really comply to that sense of community? Because when we take a look at our, my aunts or those who have been teachers in rural areas, so then they used to think of them as members of the local community or the rural community and working with those communities, right? But when we think of teachers nowadays, there is a separation between families and communities and educators and the institutions. So, well, anyways, so those are part of some of the reflections that we have for this afternoon. And in order for us to mobilize and continue with the dialogue, well, family is also important to me, although we are not perfect and we have experienced different, challenges and differences amongst us. I'd like to introduce you to one of my family members because we're going to transition into a little space. Okay, so come closer. Okay, este es Camilo. This is Camilo, my nephew. And then I invited him into the space. Lo invité porque we did an exercise, a writing exercise together. So he's going to be talking a little bit about that. Hicimos un ejercicio juntos. Entonces él les va a hablar. Entonces les presento a Camilo.
Buenas tardes. Pues el ejercicio que nosotros realizamos fue un poema. Ese poema lo hicimos en el aire libre, juntando algunas palabras sobre los campesinos, los árboles, la naturaleza y muchas cosas más. Ese poema los invita a todos los que nos están mirando a que no haya conflictos mutuamente sobre ustedes, sino que haya paz entre cada uno.
Yeah, so I'm gonna translate part of what he was saying for our friends who speak English. So he was speaking about this experience of the two of us writing a poem, you know, and bringing all these elements of nature that is very important to us because we are sharing a space with my dad and my mom, and we live in a rural area. And then how we got inspired in order to write. And the message for my nephew in his words is to invite us all to be, you know, peaceful and treat with kindness to one another. So we are going to invite you to listen to the poem that we wrote that is called One More Breath, or Un Respiro Más. And then you will listen to the voices of my nephews and my nieces in that poem. So le agradezco a las personas del máster que empecemos a proyectar el poema que se llama Un Respiro Más, en las voces de mis sobrinos y de mis sobrinas.
Un respiro más. Buenos días, naturaleza, bienvenida, tranquilidad, donde se respira el aire fresco, donde respira la humanidad. Eres naturaleza, mi hogar para pensar, donde están los abuelos, donde siempre quiero estar.
Mi abuelo siempre me enseña que con amor hay que plantar. Si lo hacemos con cariño, ahí está el bienestar.
Mi abuela siempre me enseña a tratarte con bondad. Eres querida naturaleza, fuente de vida y humildad.
Soy hijo de campesinos, de los que luchan y siempre dan más. Son mis padres y abuelos la inspiración para quererte cada día más. Cada árbol cortado nos quita un respiro más. Con cada respiro que desaparece muere un poco la humanidad.
Gracias.
Yeah, so that's a poem we wrote like in honor of my parents. And then I want to introduce you to my nephews and my nieces. So in the audio, you were listening to Valentina, who's here in the left, and then you listen to Haider. The little one is Daniel, so he cannot speak that well. So in the future, he will compose other poems. And then we have Julian as well, and then you know Camilo, who's here with me today, and Natalia. So those were the voices that you were listening in that poem. So yeah, I think that why the poem and why the title of the poem to me personally. So when we wrote this poem with Camilo, the previous day, I was reading a text that I wrote when I was in the US in 2016. And the text said, I can't breathe anymore. Like I was feeling asphyxiated when we were part of this whole political, you know, political campaigns in the US that were speaking about hatred and racism. And then all my friends that were immigrants and undocumented were in pain. So I felt asphyxiated, and my response back in the day was to create a scenario that we called Under the Skin, where we were coming together to share our stories and to create art. So the following day, after I read or was remembering that memory and read the text that I wrote back in the day, so Camilo said like, oh, I have to write a poem for the school. And then I say, what do you want to write about? And that's when everything came out. And when he said un respiro más, or one more breath, and then I came to the realization of what for me means the lessons that children teach us and younger generation teach us. So for me, my nephews and nieces are my inspiration. I keep an eye open and my heart and my ears open to the questions they bring, because that day I realized like, yeah, so there will always be the opportunity to take one more breath and to move on. So my nephews are part of the energy and the strength that I get. So that was pretty interesting to me, you know, to come to that. So with this poem and this message, we're going to transition into this second space of the afternoon of dialogue. And then this is very special also to me, because we're gonna listen to Linda. We recently met in a space where an indigenous scholar, Dr. Cajete, was releasing a publication of indigenous knowledges, and Linda is writing a chapter, or wrote a chapter for that book, and she very kindly shared with us her original piece. And then we've been reading the piece, and then she's going to present to us this experience as a Native American in higher education, and what's the point with systemic, oppression that we can sometimes experience, and then in her role as a Native American. And then we're going to have Zayan, which is to me is very special as well, because I was studying at Washington State University. I met Zayan at Washington State University. We created some bonds. We could have established I don't know, we could have interacted probably more, but then all the busyness. But still, it's very important to me to go back home to Washington State, because that's my other home, where I built such beautiful friendships like the one that I have the honor to hear here today, and that to bring into the space of dialogue. So, Zayan, thank you so much for being here. And then Daniel Ojeda, who's a master's student with whom we've been learning some lessons in terms of how we position one another and all these agendas of critical work. And then he's been doing his own journey as well with indigenous communities, indigenous knowledges. And then he's got this group, amazing music group that we listened in the morning, the NASA Histoire. And then, so it will be an honor to listen to him and some of his reflections this afternoon. So we will listen to the three of them, and afterwards we will engage in conversation. So please, if you have any questions in the YouTube and here on the Zoom, so we'll be also looking at those questions and willing to answer them later on. So so let's start with Linda. Linda, welcome to the space.
Gracias, Nancy. Te lo agradezco mucho. Thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate this. I had to switch back to Spanish. I forgot I was doing my presentation in English. Go back to English from Spanish. Here we go. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Linda Tello. I am a descendant of the Pijaos from the Central Andes of Colombia. My research is the systemic challenges of Native American participation in higher education, a synthesis of the literature. So I was reading the piece that I gave to Nancy to a friend of mine, and he stopped me and he said that it could only have been written by someone who had experienced what I was writing. He was right. So when I started this research, I started with the question of where did universities come from? Because I honestly had no idea. And then I also started with the question of how I would define Native American. For even though I was asked by my professors, I did this research during a postdoc. So even though I was asked by them to conduct this research, when I unconsciously challenged their paradigms, I was told my opinions didn't count because I wasn't from a federally recognized tribe. So it was important to me to have an inclusive definition of people who, like me, claim their indigenous heritage despite not being recognized by a governmental structure or an institutional representative. So I chose a definition that did not deny my heritage as a convenience to somebody else. A convenience that exemplifies many of the true barriers that hinder Native American participation in higher education, barriers that manifest in institutional structures through patterns of domination, dehumanization, that have become institutionalized in thought and behavior in our culture and our legal systems over the past 500 years. So I define Native American as a member of any group of the first groups of people whose ancestors lived in North, Central, and South America before the arrival of Europeans in 1492, who sought to understand their world through their place or their land. Before the arrival of Europeans, tribal nations were bound via first their land, their knowledge systems that sustain their land, their spiritual ceremonies, and their governance practices, their traditional languages, their legal systems, and their arts. Papal Bull Romanus Pontifex of 1454 and Papal Bull Inter Cartera of 1493, which have collectively become known as the Doctrine of Discovery, justified for the past 500 years until today the subjugation of non-Christian nations and people through patterns of domination and dehumanization that have become institutionalized in our language, our thought and behaviors, through our cultures and legal systems. So by removing Native people from the land that grounded their traditions, often through genocide and other forms of imperialism and settler colonialism, by removing Indigenous peoples from their place, Native Americans were separated from their identities, which included their memories, their concepts, their histories, their ideas, their spirituality. In other words, they were dehumanized. Dehumanization is caused by mass trauma on a population in the form of colonialism, slavery, war, or genocide. This dehumanization as a result of separation from what Native Americans grounded their identity resulted in intergenerational trauma. The Doctrine of Discovery, or the Papal Bulls, were authored by the Catholic Church, the same institution that founded universities. U.S. universities, building on the foundations of the Doctrine of Discovery and the Manifest Destiny in the 19th and early 20th century, held policies of the dissolution of traditional Native life. Ironically, several prestigious U.S. universities like Harvard College, the College of William and Mary, and Dartmouth College, whose founding was inspired by Native Americans, aimed to Christianize and civilize Indians. Challenges for Native students, therefore, are a consequence of intergenerational trauma known as epigenetics, which means above the gene. Epigenetics studies the concept that DNA holds memories of trauma and that this trauma is passed down from generation to generation. This intergenerational trauma, compounded with patterns of language, thought, and behavior in our cultures that dehumanize and dominate non-Western people. In other words, here is the Doctrine of Discovery. Native Americans in institutions of higher education experience these things. I'm going to share my screen here so you guys can follow along when I'm reading. You can see it. So Native American institutions of higher education experience curriculums that do not include Native culture, curriculums that lack knowledge of First Nation perspectives, curriculums that isolate Native subjects from mainstream culture and topics. They experience Eurocentric pedagogies. They experience a government that lacks leadership or does not understand or care to understand Indigenous or Native perspectives. They experience pedagogies that do not strengthen Indigenous identities. And they experience incorrect identification of their identities. And they also experience a lack of resources and materials that support Native perspectives. You can see this here. So it's curriculum, lack of knowledge of First Nation perspectives, isolation, Eurocentric pedagogies, the lack of governments that do not want to understand Indigenous perspectives. They need to strengthen their Indigenous identities, the incorrect identification of them, and lack of resources. And the barriers are here become inadequate academic preparation for students, poor adjustment to college life, personal and family problems, financial difficulties, racial and cultural discrimination, lack of easy access to college. I know one of the presenters was talking about how the students travel 3 hours to get to the class. So this is a continued problem here for higher education as well. The lack of a good database on the degreed Native American students. There's alcohol and drugs. There's poor academic advising in terms of racial and discriminatory attitudes that advisors may have. There's language barriers because often a lot of the Native students, English or Spanish is not their first language. And then there's a difference in the way Indigenous people manage time, whereas time for Indigenous people is about engaging community, whereas in the Western space, it's more like, you know, what time is it? You got 10 minutes kind of thing. It's a different way of looking at things. So again, as I was saying, the intergenerational trauma, it manifests as these barriers, as I just mentioned here. So these challenges also arise from differences in how Native people view science, versus the way non-natives use science. So for Native people, science is about, here I can find the, you can follow along with me. Just bear with me. It's easier if you guys can follow. You can see the chart. It's a long paper. We're getting there. Here it is. Yay. So for Native, science is about family, a sense of belonging, survival, knowing who you are, knowing what you are, and knowing where you came from. Whereas for Western science, it's about military application, commercialization, profit generation, industry, consumerism, capitalism. There's a huge difference there. But there's good news. The good news is that Native American communities are, one, confronting the historical trauma and starting to understand the historical trauma. And this is creating educational programs that focus on preparing Native American youth to succeed in higher education while strengthening their identities. These programs create space needed for healing the pain of all involved in historical events. Healing that, according to Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart, who's a pioneer in Indigenous healing and transformation, says are these steps that she has. There's 4. She says the first step is confronting the historical trauma. The second is understanding the trauma. The third is releasing the pain of historical trauma. And the 4th is transformation and healing. And I like to add a 5th one, and that's about creating new integrative paradigms with Native and non-Native perspectives. So since the 1970s, Native American participation and successful completion of degrees has dropped below 1%, where it has been for about the last 50 years. The recommendation to integrate non-European epistemologies into higher education is not new. The 1928 Merriam Report titled Indian Education, a National Tragedy, recommended including Native languages and culture in the school system. And the United States has models in countries like Canada and New Zealand and others around the world. And though their programs and these models are still evolving, they address historical trauma and are a step in addressing Native American challenges in higher education. Effective school practices can include holistic knowledge and spirituality, Indigenous knowledge of local populations, student engagement, strong community and parent relationships, effective teacher education and pedagogy, using cooperative learning approaches, experiential learning, active hands-on learning, integrating science with other subjects, and making connections to the world of the learner, and someone help me with this word, decolonizing, I got it, Western language used to teach science, and connecting to Indigenous cultures by focusing on Native people's contributions to science, and exploring differences between Indigenous and Western science, and relating science topics to Indigenous beliefs about the earth. And the other presenter talked about feast in school, party over food. Food always brings people together. Including Indigenous ways of knowing the world and their culture, and connecting science to topics that are important to Indigenous people. And then having traditional ethics and ethical conduct in school science, and understanding traditional seasonal cycles such as weather patterns and astronomy, using first Native languages and values, having oral speaking skills in the classroom, and understanding the balance of the 4 elements like water, fire, earth, air. And then moving away from memorizing facts and figures towards the relevance of connection to students' socio-cultural life and their world. So the doctrine of discovery and settler colonialism, that is imperialism that sought to replace, not eliminate Native people, but not to replace, but to eliminate Native people from their land, has manifested and shape-shifted into hostile, alienating, isolating, culturally insensitive, and prejudice of faculty and non-Native students towards Native students. These behaviors exclude Native students, but I am so grateful to be asked to come here, because with dialogues and discussions like this one, Greater awareness of our individual conscious and unconscious behaviors that exclude others different than ourselves comes to light. For institutions of higher education and governments are made of individuals like each of us. Therefore, the change will happen with each of us choosing to include others different than ourselves. So I started by saying that my friend said only someone who had experienced these things could write about them, how I had. And yes, he was right. From kindergarten, middle school, high school, college, university, living in the United States, I repeatedly felt excluded. I sought counseling for family traumas passed down from family who had experienced la violencia en la Guerra de los Mil Días in Colombia. But for much of the counseling, I was made the problem by teaching me strategies of how to make friends and topics like that I learned that until doing this research paper that I didn't realize that we're pathologizing me. And it wasn't until a researcher, and a native researcher in the US that I came across when doing this research, she told me about how past literature pathologized native students. And I didn't realize that that's what was happening as I was going and trying to address some of the traumas that I'd had, that I was made the problem, but they didn't realize that I was living in a society that wasn't set up to engage me and support me. And so therefore I was continually being made the problem. So that awakening of understanding how the structures were pathologizing me helped me to understand all the isolation that I felt as a Latina, a first-generation American, Hispanic, and Indigenous person in a Western space. But wait, it was really interesting. I even got discrimination from other Latinos, and including Colombians that I met in America, saying that I was too dark for a Colombian, or that I wasn't Hispanic enough, or that I was too Hispanic to be American. So it was very interesting. It's like neither space, like each space had a reason for excluding me. But honestly, looking at my experiences, I honor and I thank my indigenous ancestors, the Pijaos. And many of you all know that they were a famed warrior tribe, those guerrilleros, and that the colonizers tried to exterminate. But it is their fighting spirit and strategic guerrilla skills that I carry in my genes, and that gave me the courage to survive the challenges that I faced. And I thank Dr. Cajete, because it was a discussion with Dr. Cajete who had me realize that I carry these genes, these guerreros, these warriors in me, and that helped me to move forward. And that has enabled me to write this paper that I wrote, and that allowed me to name the systemic behaviors in this research and to read the research that I looked through to create this paper, so that I was able to consolidate and again name the experiences in a comprehensive way that I hope becomes a foundational work that will help higher educators and its leaders, like those who organize this dialogue, to contribute to become more aware of how the systemic challenges faced by Native Americans in higher education, they come from all of us. And therefore, we hold the power all the time to choose to become the change we wish to see in the world. So thank you.
Wow, Linda,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm gonna cry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for bringing your experience into the space. And I know
you.
how painful it may be to revisit, you know, the memories of the experiences we have been going through, but also how powerful it is to really come back to this idea of the intergenerational, not only trauma that we are able to process and understand in order for us to start the process of healing, but also to this connection to our ancestors and where we are getting the strength to move on, right?
Yes.
So as part of the colonization processes, precisely, we have been removed from that memory. We have been removed from that history that tell us that, yes, we have indigenous, in our case in Colombia, we have indigenous, we have African descendants, we have Rome people who came into our country, but originally we have all these indigenous communities, blood that is part of our identity, right? So then you've brought us into these very complex layers of identity construction, because everybody and every institution and people we come across and the spaces that we occupy make a difference in the ways we are being perceived, and we are being named, and we are being labeled, right? But then part of the healing process that we can perceive from you today is that reclaiming that space for self-naming and self-identifying. That is a healing step and a space that you have already navigated. And thank you for showing us the house and the courage.
Thank you.
You know, that is so important for us to listen, even more in our nation when we don't know, we are not aware again about all these multiple identities, and we don't even recognize that we are mestizos or mestizas, and we are still have this portion of Colombian citizens who think themselves as whites, you know, and that say that we benefited from colonization and that we should be thankful for that, right? So anyway, so that's part of the complex dialogue, internal national dialogue that we still need to have with educators and many different levels. But then the only point that I'd like to highlight is this importance of what we have been talking in multiple spaces with my students in the sociolinguistics course, and now the pedagogy and culture course, and at the undergraduate level, that we've been talking about these sociocultural realities of students. So how can we approach them and bring them in the classroom, but also understand them as teachers, as you know, these spaces that affects the dynamics of our students as individuals and how they operate within the systems, right? Because only by knowing what is their sociocultural, political, historical, economic reality, we are able to understand why a kid behaves in the way he or she does, right? And we are are called to be embracing the different dimensions of who our students are, right? Like they are mind, body, and spirit. They are not just the minds that are there to be filled with information, but are these bodies that are having these experiences in their families that are not always very positive. You know, we have intraviolence that is present in the families as well. We have displacement taking place. We have sexism, you know, and chauvinism that operates within families. So for us as educators to be able to acknowledge that, to bring those experiences, to engage students from that holistic dimension, is really make a difference in the decisions that we make. So we as educators have decisions whether to be complicit with perpetuating oppression and us becoming oppressors, or we can make decisions in the sense of mobilizing different agendas where people can feel that they belong to a space. It doesn't matter if the space where they belong is the classroom. That is our power, and that is our source of power, right? So a lot of reflections you leave us with, Linda, but once again, thank you so much for bringing these native knowledges into the dialogue. We will join in the dialogue afterwards again. And yes, I'm really thankful and very moved by your story and your experience. And Zayan, we are really eager to listen to you as well. Welcome to the dialogue.
Thank you so much for having me. What an amazing group that you've pulled together, Nancy. This is, oh my gosh, like feeding my soul in so many ways. So my name is Zan Nieder. I study higher education and from a cultural studies and social thought and education perspective. I currently work at Whatcom Community College, where I'm the director for teaching and learning. So I get to work with faculty and staff around professional development. And right now my work is really, well, it always is, but right now it's very much explicitly around anti-racism. And I would like to say decolonization, but I don't know how that works in a colonial institution. So, and I can go off about that at another time. Like, can we really decolonize higher ed as it's currently structured, because it was colonial, and education has been what I would articulate as the most violent colonizing force outside of war. And so we have some thinking in education writ large to think about. Anyways, I come to you today from Bellingham, Washington, in Washington State. I'm on the lands of the Lummi Nation, the Nooksack people, the Semiahmoo people, the Swinomish people, and other Coast Salish tribes who have been protecting the lands, the air, and the waterways since time immemorial. I grew up on the Swinomish reservation, and so I have some deep thoughts about that and what that means for me as a biracial Black woman, dislocated from my Black family, raised by my white family, and predominantly white and sometimes exclusively white spaces. And so when I think about my movement into this work, I am really mindful of the different subject locations that I occupy as a light-skinned biracial Black woman in predominantly white areas. Washington is still a predominantly white state. And I live in an even more predominantly white community. And so I wasn't always in this work. I resisted getting into race and racism work for a long time. I was born and raised right after the civil rights movement in the United States. And there was a lot of hope and a lot of aspiration around having a colorblind world, right, where we would judge people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin, as Martin Luther King Jr. said. However, it took a long time, even though I had experiences around race, it took a long time for me to understand those as racism, as white supremacy coming down to bear on me, because I was also raised in a poor family. I was raised by a single mom. We lived with my grandma as children. We were on and off of welfare, visiting food banks, my mom working a lot of dead-end jobs. And I too was a single parent. And so for many years, I was just struggling to survive and make sure that I had a roof over my kids' head and that I had food on the table for them. And so I resisted this work until one day, my daughter, who was in first or second grade at the time, we were grocery shopping in our neighboring community of Moscow, Idaho, another small college town. And we were at Winco and we ran into a friend of mine's mom. I know the whole family, so family friend, I guess. But I ran into my friend's mom and I was like, oh, I haven't seen your daughter for a while. How's she doing? How are the grandkids? And she proceeded to tell me how, her daughter's doing great. The grandkids are doing great. And then she says, but Jackie's pregnant. And I start really quick trying to do math in my brain because I'm like, okay, Jackie's around my son's age. Like she's a year or two older. My son, I think, was 13 or 14 at the time. So I'm like, she's 15, 16. Is this like a congratulations moment? Or is this a, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry moment? Trying to read her body language. And then she leans into me and she says, with a Black man's baby. And I went, huh? What? And I've got my daughter with her giant, huge, her eyes are like this big, giant brown eyes, just holding my hand and looking up at me. And I look down at her and I'm like, holy crap, like my kid is watching me. She's watching me like a hawk. And I'm like, I don't even know how to respond to this in the moment. And so I think at that moment I was like, huh, okay, well, we gotta go. And as we're walking away, my daughter's still looking up at me and I'm still processing. And I look at her and I said, what was that about? What just happened? She knows I'm Black. Like, I don't hide this. What, I don't even understand. So it was that moment that made it clear to me that I really needed to struggle with this, what it meant, what race means to me, what being Black means to me, what my Blackness is to me, and what it means being in predominantly white spaces. And so, I was also a graduate student at the time, again, single parent, 2 kids. And, so I wended my way through graduate school and gained knowledge and perspective and history that I hadn't had before. Which, I'm not going to go into all of that, but I want to kind of talk about like this current moment. So in the United States, many of you are aware that we are dealing with 2 dueling pandemics. One, the pandemic original to this land since European colonization of racism and white supremacy. The second is COVID. And COVID has definitely illuminated and exacerbated the racism and the white supremacy. However, I would also like to say that it's presented an opportunity to us, because now we're home, we're kind of in this moment of a pause where we can stop, reflect, look at the different systems that we're a part of, and how we can apply pressure in different ways to make meaning and lasting change. So it was early in the summer. I mean, it was earlier than the summer, but in spring, you know, we had many murders of unarmed Black people and the attempted code lynching of Christian Cooper in Central Park. That spurred us to change. So, or spurred me into my reflection. So, you know, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, in that moment, as each day there was some new horror, I just sat in deep grief, in kind of an emotional existential crisis mode, wondering what I could do, you know, myself as an individual, as a member of various communities. What can I do to apply pressure to make change? And my first thing, you know, after a couple of days of kind of walking around in a fog and crying and feeling the pain and the grief, I said, you know, I need to write an email and message this out to campus, because as most of our institutions sent out messages, I liken those to what I call administrative ease. They use a lot of words, but they say nothing, and there is no action. Like thoughts and prayers, which, yay, I'm thankful for your thoughts and prayers, but that does nothing to change the actual material consequences visited upon Black and brown bodies. And so I wrote a rather fiery email with all sorts of links, well sourced, and that was a call to action. Because in this moment, when we're looking at both COVID and we're looking at racism and white supremacy, education is deeply implicated. How is it in the United States that we have leaders at the very top of government that have been educated in the best institutions, K-20, this nation and in fact the world have to offer, that are virulent racists, that are actual Nazis? And so we've done, in my perspective, a poor job educating our people about how to have these discussions, about where racism is, about the Gordian knot of white supremacy. So I wrote that email, I sent it perfectly willing and ready to lose my job for coming out heavy and hard, that we have a responsibility in this fight to better educate our students, to create environments where our Indigenous students, where our Black students, where our Latinx students feel welcome and ready to learn, free from racism. So after I sent that email, which I was like, phew, that's sent, and people were pretty grateful. I was paralyzed for a couple of days going, oh my gosh, this call to action, I have to do something. What am I going to do? What is my action? And that's really a question that I ask myself pretty much daily. What is my action going to be today to effect some kind of change? And so I pondered on this, and I allowed myself to be paralyzed for a little bit while I reflected. From that reflection, and I talked to myself somewhat meanly. I was like, hey, woman, you've written a dissertation. You know what to do. You have spoken to this in your dissertation. You've spoken to this in different things that you've published. You speak on this at conferences. You're constantly thinking about this. You know what to do. Lay out a plan. Like, the world is your oyster. Since I am the director of teaching and learning, I get to kind of define many things that my teaching and learning center will do and the directions that we will take. So I blogged about it because it helps me to write something out first. And I started to think along the lines of anti-racist curriculum, anti-racist pedagogy, and anti-racist classroom and community contexts, as well as changing the structure of higher education. So thinking about the policies and the practices, and racial equity being written into our annual reviews is something that we have to respond to. We have to hold people accountable. So in all of that, in that process, it was me assessing what my skills, what my expertise, what my commitments, and what my capabilities were. and starting to kind of map out a path forward. I leveraged my academic scholarship, not just my own, but everything that I've read and internalized since undergrad, everything that I'm currently reading and engaging with now, the people that I have conversations with. And I liken these to use a violent term, my weapons of war. This is how I arm myself against the violences visited upon my psychological, emotional, and physical well-being, is I leverage my scholarship. And so I started pulling things together. Of course, you know, we had been home in remote work in quarantine for several months. And I was like, I got to get to the office to get some books. So that was a whole nother adventure, right? With the mask and asking permission and signing paperwork and everything else. So I pulled my scholarship together and I started creating workshops for our faculty around anti-racist curriculum, anti-racist pedagogy, and anti-racist classroom and community contexts. And I worked throughout the summer piloting some of these projects. I also, you know, I think about the work of an academic, and in my work, the way that I see it, I have many privileges. I mean, I have many layers of oppression, but I also have many privileges. And so how can I leverage my privilege in ways that towards liberation for all people, in liberatory ways? And because I see myself with that privilege, as I have a deep responsibility to underserved communities, to communities that have been largely unheard throughout the history of this of this education project in the United States. And so I started also looking for places where my expertise, skills, and commitments are best utilized. And that allowed me to reach out to one within my own institution, but I started getting involved in the larger Washington Community and Technical Colleges community. And so I'm participating in many work groups. I've been invited into discussions with some of our state legislators that are at the state level, and some that are in Washington, DC, making my ideas known to people that have greater power than I do to realize some of these thoughts and ideas. So, and I continue to look for those spaces in sharing my thoughts, right, about the crisis before us, the very real existential crisis that we all face, not just in the United States, but globally. We're seeing an awakening globally, right? What's happening in Nigeria right now, you know, the police brutality, and forgive me, because we're in this country, in the United States, we're immersed under so much chaos that I have not been able to keep up with what's happening globally as much as I normally am, because we have, as I'm sure you all know, new things thrown at us every 5 minutes. It seems like here's a new wrench to throw into your plans. So anyways, we're seeing these movements globally. We saw police brutality protests around the globe, hundreds of thousands of millions of people coming out and saying enough. The anti-Black racism is truly global. It is on the continent of Africa, as it is in the United States, as it is in Europe. And so we have a lot of work to do, but I can only focus I can think globally, but I have to also think locally. I have to think about what is my change here, because that's where my strength, I think, lies at this moment. So again, I'm working within my own institution and across institutions. I'm meeting people throughout the system and working to leverage our voices, right, to lift voices up through our community and technical college system that need to be heard, that haven't had avenues to be heard in the past. I'm learning to chart a collaborative path for racial equity within our community and technical college system with a group of really amazing, beautiful people that are across gender, across ethnicity and culture and language, socioeconomic status. We have this beautiful coalition of people that are we're moving some really meaningful work forward calling upon our ancestors from across the globe, and really thinking about what that means to inhabit these ideas, the ideas of Lakesh, the ideas of the seven generations principle from the Haudenosaunee, the 5 generations principle from, I believe, from Nigerian people. And so we really have to be thinking not just about the here and now, but we have to be thinking about the ancestors that brought us here, right? The sacrifices that they made for us to exist in this space, and the struggles that they survived. And we have to be thinking about the generations going forward and what we're building for them today. And not just, you know, like, I hope that I know that when I leave this earth, my one legacy will be my children, but I want my legacy to be more than just my children. I need to, it's my responsibility with the power and the privilege that I have to work to create more liberatory spaces that help people realize the dreams that they hold for themselves and that they hold for their communities. And so that's my work, right? Like, I have my job that pays my bills, that offers me health insurance and certain privileges, but my work is really working to create liberatory spaces for people who've not had that, and within higher education, because that's really where my expertise is. Like, I can speak to a lot of things about the healthcare industry, about politics, and I certainly have thoughts about that, but my expertise is really education, and that's where I have, I think, the most power. So so thinking about the 7 generations forward and backwards, and thinking about how I'm honoring and how I'm honoring the past, and how I'm leaving the future for those who have yet to be born. And in that, I created my own business. I'll show you the website in a minute, but I've created my own anti-racist educational consulting business. And just to allow me kind of some framework outside of my public institution to continue this work and expand this work beyond just Whatcom Community College. I'm also working on a memoir, because part of my work, a really large part of my work, is exploring and examining how white supremacy has impacted me, how I've embraced and resisted that in different ways. Catrice Jackson talks about the weapons of whiteness. So it's the silencing, right, of people of color. It's the delegitimizing our stories and validating our experiences. And in many ways, I utilize those against other people of color, because that's what I knew. That's what I was raised in. And I've seen those and felt those utilized against me. I didn't always have language to describe that. But what I'm recognizing now in my reflections is I might not have had the words or the language to describe it or to even think about it, but my body knew. My body knew in those moments when I was in a space with somebody who was hostile to me, to my race, to my gender, to my identity. My body went into hypervigilance. My shoulders went up into stress and anxiety, right? And my body knew I was not safe in that space, even though intellectually I was trying to convince myself that I was okay. I was not. And many of those people that I was not safe around are family members. And that hurts in a really strange way. It's an existential kind of pain in some ways, but it also just is, because they are also steeped in white supremacist culture. It's the air we breathe. It's the water we bathe in. And so trying to find both strength and grace in that moment, or in those relationships, is kind of one of my challenges. So part of my work is understanding who I am, but also understanding where I am in this struggle. I cannot speak to nor for African-American people by and large. I can speak to some overarching things and whatever, but I also understand that the experiences of my brothers and sisters with darker skin than I have around the globe have not been my experiences. Much of this white supremacist system, many white supremacist systems, have worked pretty well for me. And so my goal, my mission, my hope is to open up those systems, to interrupt those systems and the ways in which they they keep their boot on our neck so that we cannot breathe, that I can open those systems up for other people. So I'm working on a memoir. It's slow going, but that it's my examination that I hope one day to be able to share with the world. I'm also finding opportunities for publishing and speaking and sharing knowledge in formal and informal spaces, because I turned 50 this year, so that's kind of a moment of like this deep reflection, right? And I don't, and also recognizing my own mortality, that I probably have, if I'm lucky, 27 more years on this planet. And so what do I want those 27 years to be? And what have the last 50 years taught me? And I think that it's really easy to fall into despair, especially when you understand the history of this country, when you understand the history of this continent, and how Europeans have laid waste to and raped the land of resources, and committed egregious acts of not just physical genocide, but cultural and linguistic genocide upon all of our peoples, right? It's really easy to fall into despair. But I will say in this moment, since the most recent protests against racism have erupted in this country and globally, that I'm feeling really incredibly hopeful. I'm feeling the earth shifting beneath my feet. I'm feeling that we have this inflection point, right, of the two dueling pandemics, this violent genocidal presidential regime that we are living under, right? And that regime, understanding that regime and how it came to be and what's happening now, it's the dismantling, like they're seeing the cracks, right, in white supremacy, and they're fearful. And that's why they're doing all of these white supremacist shenanigans to keep us from voting, to keep us oppressed, to keep us visiting violence upon our bodies in more and more egregious ways. So they're feeling the fear. We have this inflection point, and I'm feeling a critical mass. I'm seeing more white people coming along in this fight and recognizing that they need to listen and that they have learning to do and digging deeper. And so I'm really hopeful in this moment that we are creating the next step to hopefully larger, not incremental, but larger, sustainable and meaningful change for this country. And I hope for this world, because I have places I want to go. I have people I have yet to meet. I have languages I want to hear. I have foods to try. I want to see this, as much of this world as I can, and whatever remains of my life. And I want that for the next generations to come. So that's my hope, is just forward looking and being in community with people like all of you, with the communities that I am privileged and honored to be able to participate in Bellingham and in Washington State. And so that's, I mean, I have a lot more that I can say, but I'll just leave it there with a lot of love and humbleness.
Yeah, that's amazing, Diane. So thank you so much. I think that once we get the understanding of how oppression operates, so we are always wondering what's to do next, right? Like, how can we mobilize? So what's the next step? So I think that if we close our eyes when we get that understanding, that's when we become complicit with oppression. So that's the first message. And I thank you for the energy and the force that you bring to us through your experience and through your voice, because that, for me personally, it's very hopeful and gives me the energy, gives me the strength to move in between all the struggles that I have to experience institutionally, when we don't have we don't have this vision of what is meant to be as a university, and we have to be in constant difficult dialogues at an administrative level that is not willing to listen, and to care about our communities. But anyway, so there's one important point that I want to leave with all of us today here, from all the beautiful, amazing points that you brought us, and it is how we come into the work that we do. And then I've been wondering, and I've been asking this question in many spaces in Colombia that have been trying to talk about decolonizing spaces, but people do not really understand what decolonizing means. And more in the English as a foreign language space, people have been talking as a fashion, let's decolonize this and that. And then when people have been coming to me for advice, I ask them, okay, so why or how are you coming into the decolonizing terrain, right? So what is it that mobilizes you to that? And what is your understanding of colonization processes so that you may want to engage in these agendas? So what I hear from you, from what you're experiencing in terms of how to approach anti-racist, agendas, and what was the turning point in your story that made you like realize like, hey, this is a part of my identity that I might have not wanted to explore before, or that I resisted, as you were saying, exploring. But hey, there's this piece of reality of this very informal dialogue with a friend or my mom's friend, and then it touches into a part of an identity that reflects a societal struggle that we need to still, and all these ideas that we still need to dismantle and deconstruct as part of the relationships that we build, right? So then the important message from all the experiences that we are listening here today is that our lived experiences and an understanding of how oppression has operated in our lives becomes the turning point into action, into mobilizing, and into coming into the field with respect and with honesty. So Linda was saying, the person or my friends told me, a person that has lived this is a person that can talk in these ways, right? So I think that is the coherence that we are showing in that is important in the kind of work that we do. Because in the morning we were saying in academia, people publish articles because that's part of the neoliberal game, right? So you need to publish 5 articles a year, I don't know how many numbers of books or whatever, because you want to be promoted, because you want to be recognized. But what is there behind, and how honest are you being with the work, and how respectful? I mean, for me, respect is very important to the scholars that have done a job before us, the indigenous communities and the Chicana, Latina feminists and Black feminists that have done this decolonizing work that are not well acknowledged in academia, and people coming to the field like saying, so this is like the new fashion term. And then, so anyway, so then I bring that piece from you, or how we come with this respect, this understanding, this drawing from our experiences, and then wondering always. I will leave this final question that Zayan mentions, and where am I in the struggle? So how do I position, again, going back to the previous questions I was highlighting. And then part of the purpose of this space is not for us to keep silent, like the government are telling us about stories of mobilizations in Colombia, like indigenous people were mobilizing, they are gonna spread the COVID. Let us not get distracted. So indigenous communities mobilizing are not spreading the COVID. We had a previous pandemics, as Diane was saying, like those neoliberal, economics and political beings. But our communities are mobilizing for a bigger purpose than the one that our governors are able to see, to acknowledge, and to work for. So that's the important piece. So silence is not an option. Paralyzing is not an option. We need to mobilize. We need to come together. We need to listen and support to one another. So thank you to both of you for inspiring us with this in these dialogues. And then we're gonna move into another powerful experience by listening to Daniel and his understandings during the pandemics as well. And he's inviting us to come together as communities. So that would be our perfect closing for this afternoon's dialogue. So Daniel, welcome to the dialogue.
Good afternoon, everyone. So please give me 1 second, please. So, sorry. Can you see my slides? Yeah. I hope. So, hello everyone. I hope you're fine. I'm gonna introduce myself. My name is Daniel Felipe Pinto Ojeda, and I'm a French and English teacher. Currently, I work as an English teacher at the UPTC Institute, the UPTC University, but also I'm singer and composer of a band that is Nasa Histoire. And today I would like to share with you my experience facing the pandemic and some situations that the same pandemic has triggered in my life. So as you can see, the name of my presentation is Come Together. Yeah, the name of my speech, of my experience is Come Together. Maybe you can relate it with one of the Beatles songs, And in fact, some of the phrases and words that you will find all along my presentation are related to relevant phrases that are part of significant songs for me. Yeah, but before starting, sharing with you my experience, I would like to discuss with you a little bit and to ask you a question. So for this part of my presentation, I would like you to please participate by turning on your micros, the ones that are participating here in the video call. That would be awesome. So the question that I would like to ask you is how the pandemic has affected you. So I don't know if there is a volunteer that wants to share with us your experiences about the pandemic and how the pandemic has affected you. So for example, I don't know, if you want to share with us your opinion in a short answer, teacher Nancy, that will be awesome. Or someone else.
This is Zan. It's affected me by giving me a moment for deep reflection and to really dig into meaningful work.
Meaningful work. Okay, that's awesome. What about I don't know, one of my partners? Maybe it could be.
Oh, sorry. Hey, Danielle. This is Linda. I was going to say, so I'm working with the Caro in Peru, and initially I was helping one of the young Caro to create a business for himself for tours, because he has a degree thanks to his parents going around the world and teaching the Andean tradition. He was able to go to university, and we were trying to do more in-person tours, but instead I helped him put everything online. So now we're still finishing up that project, but if you guys want to take a look at it, it's andeanspirit.org or espirituandino.org. So we've taken what would normally be something that's done in person, like the shamanic ceremonies, and we've created a platform online. So we've helped these young Caro like reimagine their traditions in a more technological way so they can share it with the world. So that's actually been something that was really neat, because if it hadn't been for the pandemic, we probably wouldn't have been sort of forced to reimagine how we're going to do this, because their indigenous community, like many, has been impacted tremendously because of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I like that maybe the pandemic is not just triggering like negative situations, but also like opportunities for us to grow. Yeah. But in some of the cases, and talking about maybe some of the negative consequences that the pandemic has been triggering until today, you can find some of the ones that you can see here in my screen. And is that we already know that there are some common aspects that most of us, or maybe all of us, are sharing since the pandemic started. We know that the economy, like the global economy, is falling down. We know that people are losing their jobs. We know that people is feeling depression and sadness because of several different situations, because of maybe being far away from the ones they love, maybe because of the enclosure. The same happens with the stress, with anxiety. We also feel insecurity and emotional issues, maybe because we feel afraid about getting infected with the COVID or with the virus and all those aspects that are natural. The problem is that all those aspects that maybe we don't consider as relevant, or that society doesn't consider as relevant as the mental health, triggers at the end several physical situations. Yeah, some physical hard situations. So that's the question that I would like to talk about today. And in order maybe to illustrate you a little bit more, here I would like to share with you some statistics in which we can see the percentage of adults in some different countries, not just in Colombia, who have been reporting symptoms as stress, anxiety, or great sadness since the COVID started. Yeah, and as we can realize, that's not something that just happened in Colombia or in the United States or in Canada, but it is something that is affecting every single human being all around the world. Yeah, and that's basically what I would like to talk about today. And it's my experience facing a hard situation as the anxiety since the pandemic started. So I will start since the beginning. So since the pandemic started, like a month after the pandemic started, I started to feel kind of symptoms as lack of air when breathing, And those symptoms were related to the anxiety, but I didn't know it. And as I'm a teacher, as maybe most of you, we as teachers, we don't like about having doubts, and we want to look for the answers to the questions that we don't know the answers, you know? So that's something that I did. That was the worst thing that I did, because looking in internet for an answer about the health is for nothing positive. If you look maybe for a flu, you will find that you have cancer or that you have maybe something bad, yeah? Because that's how internet works. But as I'm paranoid, I started to develop a serious anxiety problem because of that. Yeah, because I started to read and I started to feel those symptoms and I started to feel like that sick. And maybe it could seem as something ridiculous or maybe funny, but it wasn't. But it wasn't, because at the end, I started to believe that I was really bad, yeah, that I was really sick. And at the end, those problems triggered real health problems, as gastritis, as reflujo, as some different issues that are the result of maybe having depression or anxiety and all those stuff. So I started to live with a constant feeling of fear. I woke up every single day feeling that I will die. I started to wake up every single day thinking I'm gonna die. I'm dying slowly. I'm slowly dying. I don't know. My health is falling down, and all those aspects that were not quite positive for me. Yeah. So it was I was becoming something different. I was losing myself. I was losing my horizon, and it was right there when I started to look for help, because I understood that feeling bad is not bad. Yeah, feeling bad is not bad. We are human, but sometimes we feel afraid about expressing our emotions because we think that that's not right. But if we express our emotions, if we say that we are depressed or that we feel anxiety, we are fools, that we are fool, that we are crazy. But that's not like this. So it's right there when I found like my refugee in music. I started to look for some different ways to overcome that hard situation. So I started to attend to musical therapies. I started to meditate with the use of music. I started to keep in contact again with the music, to rewrite songs in order to release my soul, in order to release all the feelings that I had inside, and maybe were kind of killing me. Yeah. And I started to do this. I started to spend most of my days listening to music, at least 5 hours per day, in order to listen to the lyrics of the songs, in order to understand that I was not alone, that the people that were writing those songs maybe were facing hard moments at that time. And I started to overcome that situation. That was my way. But that's basically what I want to talk about today. And it's like the importance of music in pandemic times, the importance of music, even in education, the importance of maybe paying attention to our mental health, because that's something that we ignore, and that maybe right now in our current context is more present than ever. So here we have some examples that I would like to share with you about some specific situations in which pandemic has faced and has fought against pandemic for more than 2,000 years, sorry. Yeah. For example, here we have an example in the 7th century in Sparta, when the pandemic happened there, in which the city leaders at that epoch asked the poet Caletos for singing music every single day, yeah, in order to encourage people of that society. On the other side, we have the same scenario in the pandemics of Lesbos, with another great Greek poet, which whose name I not remember. Or another scenario that's different and that's not maybe related to the pandemics, but that maybe could seem interesting. Maybe I know that you should know Pythagoras. And Pythagoras used music music devices as the lyre. I don't know if if I'm mispronouncing the word, el instrumento, la lira, lyre. I think that is lyre, but I'm not really sure. But Pythagoras used the lyre for calming down like the drunken hooligans. So that's how we can realize that the music is a great resource for facing hard situations. The same happened in the medieval Italy, in which maybe the Italian people had a kind of ritual that was singing aloud from their windows and getting gathered in kind of black processions in which they used to sing like religious songs in order to get away from the pandemic. The same happened in epochs as the arrival of the Black Death, in which several artists maybe received inspiration in order to release their feelings. In this specific case, for example, Guillaume de Machaut, who was a musician who retells the story about what happened during the Black Death through his songs. Yeah, that's basically some like interesting facts that I wanted to share with you about how music has been facing these hard situations a long time ago. And now I would like to share with you also like some aspects why music is a medicine for the soul, why music is also important for us at that moment that we are living now. So the first one is that music can connect us to ourselves and our stories. And more than ever, today we have to stay connected with our souls, because sometimes we forget our role as human beings, and we try or we pretend that we are just logical machines, and we forget that we are emotions, that we are universe, that we are feelings. We are that, and we cannot forget it. On the other side, we have the role of music as a tool that we can use to help and to develop our creativity and curiosity. That's something that is quite important right now, because when we start feeling depression or anxiety, we prefer to stay at home doing nothing meaningful. But by means of the creativity and the curiosity that the music encourages in us, we can take advantage of those feelings in order to do something more meaningful in our lives. Yeah, to take advantage of the time that maybe sometimes we are even losing at home because we forget that we are living, and we start to repeat our daily routine every single day. So on the other side, we have the role of music and how music can help us to socialize and relax. Yeah, that's something also quite important. The same happens when we start to feel depression or anxiety. We prefer to stay away from the ones that we love, and we prefer to ignore people. But it is quite important because we have to understand that we have to socialize. That's part of our roots, let's say like this. And finally, maybe the most obvious one is that music can help us to process and decrease stress. Yeah, in order to finish with that part, I also would like to mention that it is also quite important to check and to reflect our role as teachers, because maybe we are quite worried about achieving goals, improving our standards, promoting critical thinking, promoting reflection, improving our materials, looking for the best pedagogies, for the best methodologies, or looking for different didactics, yeah, to improve our teaching practices. But we forget that we cannot improve anything if we don't start by understanding what's happening with us as people. Yeah, sometimes we look for maybe promoting critical pedagogy, as Freire says, looking for students to be capable to develop skills in order to reflect about problems of the real life, and to use the knowledge that we are trying to teach our students in a more meaningful way. But that's not possible if we don't start by understanding what's happening with us. If we don't start by understanding that we are also human beings and we are not just an example, but because sometimes we pretend that we as teachers, we are just an example, and we don't feel, that we don't have to feel, that we don't have to express. But that's a lie. We have to express because we are people, we are human. And that's it by the moment. That's it by the moment. That's like my invitation about, like, please paying attention to our mental health, because we cannot ignore those stuffs. And sometimes we prefer to ignore them, but at the end, at least, for example, in my personal experience, when I started to feel that anxiety, it was almost impossible for me to get focused on something, to get focused on the simplest task. So finally, I would like to share with you some different benefits about using music, not because of the pandemic, not because of the anxiety, but in general terms, just for you maybe to have the doubt in order to use music in your classes. And some of the benefits that music offers to you is that music, through the implementation of music, we can develop reasoning and language. We can also develop emotions that are quite important, as I told you before. We can also enhance auditory skills. Teachers can promote and help students to improve their creative thinking. And the most important for me, at least for me, and that's a personal perspective, is that through the implementation of music in our classes, we can provide our students the opportunity to express feelings. Yeah, that's something that we as society are like ignoring right now. As the teacher maybe was mentioning before, we live in a society in which the colonizing speech is more present than ever. And that colonizing speech is maybe deleting the importance of feelings in our society. And we cannot forget that at the end, we are feelings. Yeah, we are humans. You are human beings. As a final conclusion, answering to the question, why is it important to use music? I would like to conclude with just that quote, and is that music accompanies us in all the stages of our life. And fortunately, today the educational community is clear about the key role that music plays in the global education. So that's everything by the moment. We have to be conscious about that. We have to be conscious about the importance of mental health. We have to be conscious about the importance of emotions, and that maybe the music is not just a resource for students, because we think that we can use music for students, the Suggestopedia or whatever, for our students to improve their learning process. But we ignore that we as teachers, we can also use music for improving our emotions and even some problems that are inside us and that we ignore. And overall, despite we are students or despite we are teachers, all those aspects related to the arts and to the emotions are important, because at the end, as I told you, and I have been repeating until that moment, we are human beings. So that's everything by the moment. And thank you for listening to my experience.
That's amazing, Daniel. So that's the perfect ending for our dialogue today. I'd like to share with you that we had interaction in the YouTube. We had Daisy Mariana telling us how the pandemics has allowed her to explore her inner motivation to do the kind of work she engages in. We had Angela Lopez also speaking about how she has been able to develop different skills in terms of how to handle technology, and also has had the opportunity to share more time with her family. Although on an academic level, she had to postpone or put on hold her master's studies. Angie Milena also talked to us about the importance of the opportunity she's been having to share with her family as well. And Daisy Mariana spoke to some of the elements that you mentioned in terms of this idea of death surrounding us, that is there as part of the subconscious state of that we are experiencing now with the pandemics. And Claudia Lopez also speaking about this rural experience as a rural teacher, and where there is not much more technology than a paper, a pencil, and WhatsApp, right? So then thank you everyone for sharing with us and engaging in dialogue through YouTube. So you are seeing part of the class here still connected. And then we are ending, part of the purpose with this event has been to nurture our spirits. We're gonna be sharing also here on YouTube. Luis Fernando, te agradezco si compartimos este sitio en YouTube. We're gonna share on YouTube Zayan's website so that you can check it out later on. But then our purpose during the whole journey is to really connect, to understand, to be hopeful, and to really think or consider other ways of mobilization or of acting. Today, this afternoon, we have been reminded of the act of pausing, taking a breath, and then also going to or searching in those spaces that can be a refuge. As Daniel was saying, what is our refuge in the midst of all this chaos and whatever struggles we are experiencing individually and collectively? Is it music? Is it art? Is it dance? Is it sharing with your friends through technology in different means? So let's explore those different ways of self-care. So let's remind ourselves, in the same way that we ask what's to be done, let's ask what can I do in order to preserve my humanity so that I continue being alive and doing the kind of work that we are doing, right? Because we need to be to make sure that we are still on this existential plane or plan, so that for us to continue caring, doing the work. So it is my deepest wish that we had all been able to get a new fresh air during this day, during this session, that you, after this time, you can also take some time to debrief, and that we keep strengthening one another. So I send you all my love, my gratitude to everyone in YouTube. Thank you so much. You are doing important work in all the scenarios. You are making presence. So Claudia, Daisy, Angie, all the people, we have 15 people at this moment still connected. So thank you for all the beautiful work you're still doing with the communities. We need your hands, and we hope that we can get more hands to do work that matters. So have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon to you all. See you. Take care.
Gracias, Nancy.
Gracias.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Gracias.